or multiple CSS properties that are applied in a specific HTML element, which you can see in the HTML code. So we have here H1, to H1, and to paragraph tag. So as you can see, going back to the CSS properties, you have multiple properties that are applied in paragraph and H1 elements. Now, these multiple properties can be placed in either a class or an ID selector, which refer to in an HTML tag. Let's say, for example, we will place this one. We are going to apply this in a paragraph. Let's say here, we are going to place or use the class. Now, in a paragraph, we are going to apply a class attribute in a paragraph element or in a paragraph tag. So if you apply the class as an attribute in an HTML tag, you just write class with an equal sign, double quote, and the name of the class. For instance, we wanted to use one as our class name. Again, we use a class attribute in a paragraph tag. Take note that we have two paragraph tag here. The first one contains box 1 text, and the second one has box 2 text. Now we have class 1 here, as you can see, and if you're referring to this class attribute 1, you have in the CSS property, you have to write dot and the name of the class. So for instance, these multiple CSS properties will be applied or will be assigned in a class 1. This dot 1 refers to the class here in the paragraph tag. So that's how you mention class in the CSS. So again, you have to put dot and then the name of the class. So it needs to say that these multiple properties under the class 1 will be applied in the paragraph. Okay, so take note that going back to the paragraph tag, take note that the first paragraph tag or the P tag has a class 1 and the other one has none. So as you can see, after we mention dot 1 here, these properties are applied in this particular element. So the box 2 did not inherit this properties because it has not been mentioned here. Now if you're going to use, or if you're going to write class and you wanted to inherit the same element or the same CSS property in this P tag, you just simply mention the name of the class. So see, the box 1 and box 2 have the same format, have the same layout, because we mentioned the class 1 in the same one. What if the second paragraph tag has different properties or CSS properties? Would that be possible? Yes, but you are going to use another name. Right? So since you have different set of properties, for example, we will replace this one h2 as dot 2, and then we mention here class 2, which will be applied. These properties here will be applied, this set of properties will be applied in the second paragraph. See, so This that's basically one of the advantage of using the class. You can differentiate the set of properties, CSS properties, in each of the in the same tag or in the same HTML element, but make sure that you have different class name. Okay, so that's one of the advantage of using the class. The next thing is, would it be possible to use the same class name in the different element? Say for instance we wanted to apply class 1 in H1 element or H1 tag. So let's see. Here you have two H1. The first H1 has CSS box model, and H1, the other H1 contains hello. But as you can see, there are no CSS properties applied here. Now, the question is, would it be possible to apply the same class attribute in the other element aside from the paragraph? Let's try this one. So we have to mention here class double quote. Say we wanted the class one to be applied somewhere here. That's it. So that's basically one of the advantage of using the class. So we have here different property for class 1. Black border and background color is pink and the text is blue. So similar CSS properties are being applied here because we mentioned the same class attribute or class name. What if something has changed in the CSS properties of class 1? For instance, we wanted to change the color. We are going to replace blue as red. So let us try what happened. So of course, as you can see, the color of the text has changed for all the elements that has mentioned or used the class 1. Now let's talk about ID selector. So ID selector or ID property or attribute is somewhat similar to class, but if you're going to apply that one in a JavaScript, each of the HTML elements should have a unique ID name. Okay, for instance, let us try to change this dot to, again, if you are referring to a name, a class name, it has to be preceded with a dot. But in the ID selector, instead of mentioning the word class, you write ID and then the name of the ID selector. So here, now we mention here ID 2, but we use the dot here, so it means to say that this 2 here is still a class. So we have to replace the dot with a hashtag. Okay, I would like to emphasize that if you are using ID property with a name, then the CSS element, you have to, if you refer to that particular ID, you have to write hashtag and then the name of the ID selector. So as you can see in the result, these series or multiple CSS properties are applied in a certain HTML element that mentions the ID selector. Class and ID selectors are helpful, especially when you are going to apply series or multiple CSS properties in a particular section of your web page. And it would be very easy for you to manipulate the layouting if you use the class or ID selector. in a certain region of the page. And of course, that can be applied in any HTML element, um, like the div tag. You can do, for instance, you wanted to apply the div here, and then here. Yeah, sorry. So that's it. So this is one division, and in a certain division, so it means to say that this box 1 hello and box 2 is included, or I mean is part of one division. And if you name this division as, let's say for instance we wanted to have mention or apply a one division here, or a class 1 here. So as you can see, this defines the entire division here with the same properties applied in it. And inside this division are different elements like P and H1. So it would be easy for you to identify or define a certain region in the page. Again, to sum it up, if you have different classes is applied in a certain element, same element, if you wanted to have different CSS attribute to be applied in it. Like for instance, the paragraph, we have the P tag here, 2P tag, but we apply different attribute here. The first P has a class and the other P as an ID. You can also use classes, but take note that you have to have a different class name in each of the same tag, so that you can differentiate the properties that will be applied in that specific element. And also for the ID, although you can mention the ID, you can apply the ID in each of the HTML tag, but if you are using JavaScript, the ID name should be unique. So that's it for ID selector and class selector.